back up the chat. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in one of our, I suppose, more focused workshops. We've come up with this sort of series of workshops, as I think you know, in response to all the sort of comments and questions that you have all raised about CoFSA. And we realized it wouldn't be much of a alliance if we then went off and tried to answer all the questions and comments you came up with by ourselves. So we thought it'd be great to do this in a collaborative manner. And today's workshop is going to really focus on, what is the vision of CoFSA? And this came up a lot in our introductory partner workshop. So we're really excited, and we think it's a really important conversation to have. So I'm really pleased you're all on the call. Thank you so much for joining us. It will be 2 hours today. We're going to start with a meditation by Thomas to ground us and bring us all into the space. And then Thomas will present some slides reminding us all of some of the comments that were raised already and some of the questions and sort of issues where we think are important for us to consider. And trying to come up with what the vision for CoFSA should be. And then we will have sort of a more interactive set of activities. So some breakout groups, come back in plenary, discuss what's come up, and then go back into breakout groups just to build on what we've discussed, and then come back to see where we've landed. Just to say, the idea is not that we are going to be trying to formulate and wordsmith today a vision and mission for CoFSA. Not at all. I think we really want to keep it sort of broad, visionary, and just capture as much rich ideas that you all have. And then we will go away and try to distill and make some sense of what's come out of today and share it all with you and the rest of the CoFSA gang that couldn't make today. So hope that is all clear as mud for now, at least. And Thomas will clarify and present a lot more in the slides. But before we get into that, I will hand over to you, Thomas, to bring us into the zone.
Thank you, Andrew. So yes, indeed, we'll have this 5-minute meditation. So we take a comfortable position, well seated, spine upright. Can feel our feet touching the ground, the contact of our hands, maybe on our laps. We connect with our body, our sensations. We pay attention to our breathing. Our breathing in. Our breathing out. Can relax and arrive. Can enjoy this moment of calm during our day. Maybe we have been running a bit today. It's good to enjoy just a moment of resting with our breathing. Relaxing our body. Calming our minds. letting all that outside this session. Take a time to arrive. To rest. Mindful for breathing in or breathing out. Let's make this session a gift in our day. Place where we can really connect, really come in with the whole of ourselves. And connect together to the higher purpose of this initiative. To be able to listen to what wants to emerge through our work. It's good to rest in the present moment. Take the time to enjoy it together. We are really here to start this workshop. Thank you. And we can step in. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. I don't know about everyone else, but I certainly needed that. And I've only been awake for an hour or two. It's early morning. So for those in Europe, hopefully that was a good landing. It also reminded me why we're doing all of this. So it was a perfect start for this conversation about what is our vision. Maybe Jerome, or if Jerome, if you could just go on mute, that'd be helpful. Thanks. But I'm still sort of feeling that there are a few new faces here, or maybe not everyone knows each other, and maybe my invitation to say hi in the chat wasn't enough. Is anyone sort of feeling newish? And if you don't know anyone, I would invite you maybe just to say hello and introduce yourself, or even, you know, ask someone else that you aren't so familiar with to just sort of say hello and say something about themselves. Let's just spend a couple minutes on this. I just want to make sure everyone sort of feels connected to everyone else. So if anyone sort of is a bit new to this and wants to say hi, or would really like to know who someone else is, you're looking at their face and going, hey, you just don't look that familiar to me, just go ahead and say hello. Can you just introduce yourself? So does anyone want to
Okay.
start?
So I feel completely new here. I don't know many of the faces. I'm Teresa from Rio, chef and designer, and the founder of Instituto Maniva. So I don't know if I should ask the people.
Why don't we do this, Teresa? Why don't we'll just spend a few minutes on this, so we won't go around everybody, but why don't you just ask one person that you would like to know more about, and just pick on one person and ask them to introduce themselves to you and
Okay,
to us.
it's difficult, right? Simon.
Hi, Teresa. Well, I saw you in the previous meeting, so I know you live, and I know in your lovely documentary that you showed us. So I'm a communications lead for UNDP FACS and involved in the development of CoFSA. So yeah, great to talk to you again, and obviously fascinated by the documentary production in particular.
And Simon, is there anyone that you see here that you're not so familiar with? You want to ask them to
if I could work out how to make my iPad work, let's ask I'm just having a look through Rachel Lilly. Tell us more about you.
Thank you, Simon, I think. Yeah, so I'm Rachel. I know some of the people here. I think some of the people know me. In fact, some of the people I think brought me here to this this meeting and this work. And I'm based in Wales. I'm currently working through Birmingham University Leadership Institute and Aberystwyth University Behavioural Insights Research Centre. And I've spent the last few years working with mindfulness in the civil service and in government and linked to social and environmental change. Yeah, so I've developed a program that I'm adapting for a community setting as well. So
if there's someone, yeah, just maybe just pick one person who you really doesn't look that familiar to you, and you can just ask them to say hello.
Well, is Katie there? I can see a picture there.
Yeah, Katie, you might need to show yourself. There we go.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having some internet problems, so I was trying to just use the without the video. But my name is Katie, and I am based here in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, as well. And I work at Sinal do Vale, which is a center for regeneration of ecosystems and food systems and communities here in periphery Rio de Janeiro in the Atlantic Forest. So I will, someone I don't recognize, Joshua, I believe. Oh no, let's see.
Yes, I'm Joshua. I don't know if there's another Joshua in the house.
Yeah.
Yes, you, Joshua, please.
Okay. So I'm Konkanko from Cameroon, speaking from Portugal. I was introduced to this group by Nick, to Alice and Tom, whom I haven't met. So I don't know many people in the house. But I am founder of the Bafut Eco Village, which is part of the Global Eco Village Network, and a council member for the Global Eco Village Network, Gen Africa. I started an organization in Cameroon called Better World in 1996. So the idea was to refocus young people to the land. And we started experimenting with regenerative agriculture. But recently, because of the war that started in 2016, we were kind of exiled because of our radical revolutionizing the youth. And I found myself here in Portugal with a team from Cameroon. We are 6 of us carrying a program we call Permaculture, the African Way, and networking with eco-villages here in Portugal and in Europe generally. I have a rich experience working with the Cameroon government for 20 years, and I wanted to complement it by bringing in indigenous knowledge, wrapping it around food sovereignty. So with the present shift, I am looking more into digitalizing the permaculture to support refugees, and not only those who are in refugee camps or those who are struggling in Africa, but also migrants. I think there is room for helping the vulnerable in the communities here in Europe to be able to cope with the present crisis. And it's also a way of bringing the food networks to consider regenerative futures. So I joined a bit late. I was struggling also with my internet.
Well, welcome, Joshua. You sound like the ideal person to be part of our group, connecting policy and government and youth and agriculture. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. And I have to say, I like your lotus flower in the background. Why don't you help us conclude this little exercise and just pick one person that you'd like to hear from, and then we'll wrap up for now.
Yeah, I don't know if Alice had already gone. That's why I was a bit. I don't know who's spoken and who's not.
Sure. No, I haven't already been. Yeah, I'm Alice, and I'm the project coordinator for the Conscious Food Systems Alliance. And I have the pleasure of knowing everyone in the call, I think. I think we've all spoken before. So yeah, great to see you all. And I think we can maybe move on to the next part of the agenda.
Yeah, thank you. Great. So I think that gave everyone a bit of a glimpse of the variety and richness we have on the call. It always amazes me with Zoom that people are calling in from so many different countries and locations. So it's great to remind ourselves that we have Rio de Janeiro and other countries represented here as well. So thanks for that, everyone. And certainly during the breakout groups, you'll have more of a chance to get to know each other too. But with that, yes, Thomas, over to you for the slides and the deck.
Thanks, Alice. So yes, we are in this series of mini workshop. We had even one general one. We started this series on March 3rd. Then we have this ambitious workshop on April 28th, which turned out where we wanted to treat different issues together. And then we decided to go in detail with each of them. So that's what we are doing also today. Next week also with a series of change. And we had on Monday, we have one on the grassroots perspective. That was really, really great. And we discussed also on May 20th of breathing and practice room where the core partners should meet to co-create this initiative. And we'll have another one on the community space on the 5th of July. And from there, as Andrew said, we will be more calm during July and August before reconnecting together. Next slide. So yes, today we want to talk about our vision of success and general strategic approach, and we'll also use that space to weave this vision together, and see where we converge, where maybe there is more diversity. Next one. Yeah. So remember, just here are some language that we have been using so far, which reflects the diversity of how we can approach that subject. We've talked about established consciousness as a key evidence-based practice to envision and create a regenerative food systems. We talk about developing the inner foundations, mindsets, values, and skills for sustainability and regeneration, the application of evidence-based methods to cultivate the whole human as a vital element to transform food systems, leveraging the power of inner transformations through proven approaches such as mindfulness to support systemic change towards sustainability, starting with the food and agricultural commodity systems. Many different types of wording. We can use, so we have not yet landed, to a specific language and very defined framing of this initiative. we are keeping track of our exchanges. These ones are mostly from the workshop we had at the end of April on this question. Some questions came out: how to balance, focus on inner change and outer change. To what extent do we need to define and actively support a specific vision of a conscious food systems versus specifically injecting consciousness in it? What kind of change in worldviews are we aiming to bring about? It has been said that we need a bold vision to inspire others, but it must be flexible enough so people can find that context-specific efficacy. So it's not a plan. It cannot be a plan because it's a catalyst for transformative processes for communities. So there's also a diversity of how it is implementing in practice. Who is our target audience? At the global level, at country level, or maybe at local level? We start with ourselves, on the ground, or both. The next slide. It has been mentioned we need to ensure the diversity of the alliance. We are working on that with integrating more people also from the grassroots level. The issue of cultural appropriation. Make sure this initiative doesn't become the global north, talking about ancient practices of the global south. Involving farmers not as recipients or for training, something developed top-down, but really as co-creators of projects, include grassroots actors in the process of design, maybe define a common understanding of consciousness, and work on the language, so also that can engage those who are uninitiated to that, and enable champions to communicate these ideas within their organizations. Can go to the next slide. So these were some thoughts we just wanted to remind you, because you know, it's an ongoing conversation that we are carrying away with us. So one of the key questions that sits at the core of this initiative, at least from our perspective from UNDP, is that we have in UNDP a portfolio of 1.2 billion in the food and agricultural commodity space. And so we're working on how to move these sectors towards sustainability and regeneration, but we are not integrating really the inner dimension. And so our question is, how can we leverage this global portfolio to make an impact through CoFSA and its focus on the inner dimension, the consciousness? We know we want to make some changes, many changes that requires a different mindset in the agricultural space, from relentless production to sustainable land management, from monoculture to regenerative agriculture, from conventional food consumption to reduce food loss and waste and changing diets. We want to move away from corporate pressures for lower farm prices to social justice and fair prices to farmers, and from agrochemical subsidies to nature-based solutions. So all of this, we are aware needs for a change of mindsets and specific capacities, how we can bring that to make our work more impactful. So a question for us also is, who is our target audience? Are there practitioners in that space at the global level, such as some of us, or country level? Or is it we want to bring that to companies, to governments? Is there any specific sequencing for that? Should we, you know, first build the capacities and understanding of the organizations on what we are up to, and then use this organization to bring that closer to local communities and farmers, for example? And how do we, you know, how do we move towards, do we focus on change at the country level, at the project level, institutional change, etc.? So here are the key questions we'd like to work on today. So main question, like, if we have the resource to implement this alliance, what we want to achieve in the next 5 years? What would success look like in 2026? As I mentioned also, who is our target audience? Who are we trying to build capacity for? And this last question, is there, so as we said, we are working on a sustainable food system. Is that different from what would be a conscious food system? Or is that, because we're talking about kind of injecting consciousness into our portfolio of sustainable food system, but should we also, working on people and processes, but should we also try through CoFSA to change practices and institutions in the food systems? What's the difference then between what we already doing as sustainable food systems or what could be a conscious food systems, and how should CoFSA support that difference? So these are the questions we have today for you.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. Just one clarification from my side, and then I will open it up for questions, clarifications. I would suggest we won't take sort of comments and feedback because we're going to jump into breakout groups where that can all be discussed. But I do want to make sure people have a chance to ask any questions of clarification. But just one from my side is that, yes, we're talking about mainstreaming, embedding, injecting all of this work into UNDP's food projects, but also any other partner of CoFSA. I want to be very clear about that. So, for example, we've already started talking about with WWF about a project they have in India where maybe we'll be able to help work with them. So we're just putting ourselves there because we know our work, but it's not about UNDP here. It's about practitioner projects, let's say, on sustainable food. Okay, so with that, let me just open it up for some, certainly any questions that arose from those slides. Christine, let's start with you. I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. I found it very important when you said that the idea would be to use CoFSA as a leverage to change, for changes in relation to the global portfolio of UNDP. It's also related to your comment just now, Andrew. But I was wondering if you can give us a bit of a background about this global portfolio, because I think that's really important and perhaps to understand a bit more about it.
Okay, I'd suggest maybe we'll take a set of questions if other people have questions, and then we can try to answer them all. Anyone else? You can either put a digital hand up or a physical hand. No, everything crystal clear, ready to run in the breakout groups. All right, great. So just Christine, on our portfolio at UNDP, it's a mixture of projects. So some are looking at protecting biodiversity within agricultural landscapes. Others are about promoting climate smart agriculture, so helping build resilience to climate change and promoting adaptation within agricultural landscapes. Others are about looking at farmer poverty. So we have different teams. We have poverty teams, biodiversity teams, climate teams, adaptation teams, gender teams, and they all have projects that are supporting shifts in agricultural landscapes. Yeah. So, and there's no one size fits all. Thomas and I were talking about this as we got ready for this call. We don't have like a definition of what is sustainable agriculture in UNDP, and every project's achieving that. But it's essentially these principles that we laid out in this slide, and it is ensuring environmental, social, economic sustainability within the agriculture landscapes and sectors where we're working with those sort of thematic lenses and anchors. What we can actually do, maybe Thomas, Alice, is we can share later the UNDP strategy on food and agricultural commodities for those interested. And actually what we could do is maybe encourage our other partners like WWF and everyone else to also start sharing what they're doing on sustainable agriculture, because this is the thing: is it sort of sustainable and then conscious, or conscious in sustainable? And that's, I suppose, a lot of what we'll be discussing today. Jerome, please.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. This is really my first meeting with you, so I'm trying to get my head around it a little bit. If we go in breakouts and if we talk about strategy and scope, it would help me a little bit if I were to understand a little bit better, not just the UNDP I have a sense of what you're about, but I'm not sure about the size of your team, and how big this alliance, what the scope of this alliance is, and the the strength, and kind of a little bit a sense of the size of it, because that may give a little bit of guidance of what to aim for, and how you integrate with other initiatives. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's not that straightforward to answer. Let me just say a couple words on that, because I think it is very useful, and then Thomas can also talk to it. I mean, this is a very emergent alliance. So, I mean, within UNDP and the big portfolio, there's hundreds of people working on all of the projects. With CoFSA itself, I suppose at UNDP we have a team of 4 or 5 different people that I've brought together to work on this. And then, as you see, everyone on the call plus other partners are all joining this alliance. So I think the idea for today is, when we think about what we want to achieve in 5 years, understand that we're starting, the idea started just last year. So it really is brand new, it's emergent. You saw from Thomas's sort of series of workshops. We're a bit of a snowball, we're growing, and it's really great to see familiar faces on the call. And I think we're strengthening the dialogues and these partnerships within this coalition. We're growing the coalition, but we're still in a formative stage, and we don't have any sort of core funding, let's say. I mean, I'm providing some seed funding to get us moving, but that's why we sort of put in the questions, if we were resourced, what we want to achieve. So I think that the idea is that we're building on, everything UNDP and WWF and other partners are working on, but on the conscious side, it's really emergent and it's starting. So, but I don't want us to be too hampered by whether we have, funds or not, or what our capacity is. Like, what would we love I think this call is, I think it's good to bring reality into it, and maybe we discuss sort of aspirational visions and real visions. I mean, that could be very useful to do, and we can put that on the table in the breakouts. But the idea is, like, if we can get going, and if we're successful, and if we get funding, what are we really trying to achieve here? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so with that, great opening questions. I hope that was all helpful. Let's go into the breakout groups. The idea is we'll have 20 minutes in the breakout groups. So meeting back at around 5 to the hour, whichever hour your time zone is in. So Alice, are you going to do this for us? What's the plan? Back to our group.
It's never enough time.
Did everyone feel the same?
Yeah.
Go back.
We can get another 5 minutes.
Well, what I would suggest, perhaps, Alice, is when we go for the second round of breakouts. I mean, I was thinking we should mix people up, but maybe should we stay in the same groups? What do people think? I think maybe just stay in the same groups to keep deepening what we were talking about, because we sort of had a first round and we were just touching on stuff. So maybe let's do that. How about now all right, so everyone seems to, as always, we never get 100% consensus, but I think the majority says yes, we'll stay back in the same group. So please take note of that, Alice. But
can I just ask the facilitators of each group to write who was in your group, as I haven't memorized exactly who was in each one. Thanks.
Okay, I will do that. But why don't we, how long have we got now, Alice? We have an hour left. So what's the best way? Have around 15 minutes perhaps of plenary? Yeah. So why don't we do that? Let's have around 15 minutes or so now of people please sharing insights that they've taken away from their breakout groups that they'd like to share with the group about the CoFSA vision. Again, digital hands good, otherwise physical hands and all. Okay, we have Jamie and then Teresa. Jamie, please kick us off.
So yes, my group, please feel free to jump in and intervene. But the suggestion was to initially tackle the question of target audience, as we felt that that might really shape the question of what could be achieved in 5 years' time, what the vision might be.
Let me just ask everyone to go on mute, apart from Jamie, Teresa, Simon. There we go. Great. Please.
Yeah. So we tackled primarily the question of audience, and I guess there were some. We sort of discussed some of our assumptions and had some questions about who that might be and how we might sort of categorize them in the kind of presentation that was given, and from what we picked up from previous sessions, it feels like there's at least grassroots initiatives which would be highly co-created, adapted depending on cultural context. You know, we heard from someone Monday that used, you know, Islamic philosophy and language in order to teach holistic thinking, for instance. And they would, yes, certainly be the much more sort of flexible. You could give guidance, and we need to give support and funding for them to be you know, sort of cultivated systemically, but not parachuted in. But it feels like there's also the kind of more global players, whether that's private sector or other national and transnational organizations. Could that be less adapted and more sort of internationally delivered at a global level? Is that more of a leadership training? You know, is it a what do you call it? What did we call it? A kind of development journey? Is it a kind of a MOOC that could, where people from different countries and different organizations could come together? So, you know, we had some questions really for the UNDP team, really from my perspective, about, would you see this being split into two different streams? Are there multiple streams of activity? Which of those two that I mentioned, if that's kind of somewhat accurate, would be a priority? Certainly, if there was resources to do both or all of them, then it would probably be more effective, because change happens like the unfurling of a flower, not putting all the emphasis on one petal. The petals have to open at the same time. And some of the issues we've had in politics is that we have some politicians practicing, small groups of practitioners committed to more mindful politics, but if the system is very unmindful, it's very difficult for them to enact change. So is it about sprinkling it out through the whole system, or are you going to go deep with one particular area? I think those questions around target audience perhaps sort of were leading our thinking anyway.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. I don't know, Thomas, if you want to say anything about that. Should we keep going with some more comments?
I think we should rather keep going. Yeah.
Let's keep going. Yeah, it shouldn't just be sort of a back and forth with us. So, Teresa, please.
Yes, in our group, two words appeared, like sustainable and consciousness, like if they were opposite or not. It's a philosophical question. And also, Gabor came to the focus word consumption. So the question is, how do we change consumption? And in my point of view, it has two ways, like influence like advertising, fear from health issues and all that, and regulation. So I think regulation is top down and fear and influence is bottom up. So I think that's the biggest question, because if I look at the screen here, I see lots of people that we have the answers, we have some solutions, some little or big solutions, but the thing is how to change the consumption. That's for me, that's not the focus group, it's the focus issue. And it's not something that, because people have been, like in Brazil, we have like the largest toxic agriculture, and people hear all the time that's not good. So that's not enough. No, information is not enough anymore. So we have to go further in a more creative way of changing consumption. And I think our group got in that point. I don't know how we go further now.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. Anyone else? I see we have Jerome with his hand up.
Yeah, so I was triggered by what Teresa was saying, and we were also discussing in our group about the connection between the inner and the outer. And so, and that may be actually, a good way to come to systemic change is to really focus on this connection. And, I think we all have views and, as Teresa was saying, maybe solutions and, we can team up on the inner dimension, but how meaningful will that be if it lacks that outer connection? And, I think there are beautiful processes like Theory U and lots of other processes that we're familiar with, where if we involve stakeholders across the board, including private parties, and if we allow them to be part of that, coming out of the inner and start dreaming, responding to a calling around things they're really passionate about, then I think it would be meaningful to also really encourage this, move into outer action. And I think if you think about, what would you be dreaming of in 5 years? Well, I think deep partnerships and concrete action across the whole chain, and be really bold in visualizing that. And I think, saying, and it shouldn't be dependent on heavy processes and UN programs, let's say, but I think maybe some of the private parties might be able to step in and saying, why don't we invest a little and try that? And then, I see creative people here and filmmakers and visualizing that quickly. So I think they can create a kind of a virtuous process. And I think if we can be really bold in visualizing that would be quite exciting, I think. Yeah. But the question was a little bit, and we just got at the top, is like, how far, we haven't heard a lot about this outer element so far, and we were just mainly curious about the linkage between the two.
So are we.
Okay.
So are we. That's what we're trying to get a little bit more light on here. So that's great. Thanks, Jerome. Okay, I see we're stimulating the juices here. So Rachel and then Simon. Please, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I know in our group we were kind of overwhelmed with, the hugeness of the problem we've kind of put in. Basically so many issues here, and they're all, as we know, complex and systemic issues. And then we're talking very broadly around consciousness. And it strikes me, one of the issues that came up in our group was the one where, we've got the people on the ground, we've got this lack of connection between the leaders and the people on the ground, and the reality of the problem, the reality of the experience of the people on the ground. And I'm wondering if we're being a little bit the same. We're kind of being a bit top down, saying, consciousness and inner work, that's gonna shift something on the ground. And in my experience and some of the work that I've done, I really shifted that round and started to really look at the problem in more detail, like connect with wherever we're going to work and say, well, how can this consciousness thing we're calling consciousness actually meet the needs of that problem? so if we're a few of us talking about systems approaches, then consciousness raising in itself doesn't, you know, a systems approach is a very specific kind of science in itself. You know, it's a very specific approach. You've got to start saying, well, if I want to get more systems approaches happening in a particular situation, what can I bring from consciousness to meet that problem that's going to make that problem, it's much more technical in a way, that's going to support that problem. You need certain capacities and understandings to do systems approaches. So I think we need a much more, speaking in these very broad terms about very complex problem with a very complex answer, which consciousness is, has one, the danger of being a bit top down, and two, just being too broad and too big, too vague.
So Rachel, can I just not push back in a resisting way, but just push you to go a bit further? So therefore, what would you suggest? How do we get past that? Or
well, I think you have to spend, I mean, a bit like we're saying, generally, you have to spend time with the problem. I mean, I've worked with some of these issues. You know, I've worked on behavior change and sustainable land management. I've worked on social justice issues. I've certainly worked a lot on reduce food waste and recycling. They're all really complicated problems. And they've all got different players involved. You know, the minute you start to say one, you know, there's this one thing, as we know, they're systemic problems. So what do? Well, one, you might try and work on a problem as a system. And then you might say, well, how can I bring consciousness practices in that might help with this systems approach? Now, I know I work with somebody in Hull who works on a systems approach, and he really needs, when he's working with a project, so maybe this grounds it, when he's working with a project and trying to bring in a systems approach, he needs a different mindset to support, you know, the ability for people to see things and work in systems. So thinking about a specific tailoring of consciousness practices that will then make sense in that context and will be tailored to that context. And it will bring out, you know, it will bring out specific elements around attention or a connection that will solve that problem. Whereas if I'm maybe working in a different, you know, with farmers in a particular location to bring about some specific change, then I'd be working with something else. It's got to, and then it becomes possible, something becomes possible. But we don't actually have the capacities, I don't think, in mindfulness communities to actually do this. We don't really train people to do things like that.
yeah, it's a sort of the application and the application and integration.
Yeah,
I think we can get more into that. Great. I'm now already feeling like we're not going to have enough time here, but let's keep going. All of these comments are really stimulating me, at least, my brain. Simon.
Yeah, just to build on what Rachel was saying, really, I think we are in danger of assuming there's this track of mindfulness, consciousness stuff going on, and there's this track of big systems change going on, and somehow they're going to automatically dovetail together. And I don't think that's necessarily true, although it might be an aspiration to cause that to happen. I was just this morning looking at the video edit of a thing we did called jurisdictional dialogues, where we got sustainability practitioners in Colombia and Indonesia to work in parallel on projects that they put together. And that was trying to introduce consciousness and mindfulness into the way they work together as groups. And the thing this is an answer to the what does success look like question. The thing we noticed was when they said, I can see myself in somebody else's shoes, that for those individual practitioners was, oh, okay, that's a light bulb going on that we think is a very good indication that things will be better in the future. So our group talks a lot about establishing the credibility of the field that we're in. And I think back to the dovetailing thing, we have a lot of credibility within consciousness and mindfulness as a stream. And we need to work out with the evidence that I'm sure a lot of my group had already that we're happy to gather together, that how does that field positively affect the outcomes in the outer world. I think we've got a lot of people looking for better outcomes in the outer world. So it's how does the inner world affect the outer world is the set of evidence we should be looking to. I don't think we need to start anything new to build that. We need to gather it all together and synthesize it in the best possible way.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we go back into the breakout groups, I think it's a good thing for us to be thinking about is there's so much out there, and there's so much that needs to be done, and so much that's already happening by many of you. But what is sort of the sweet spot for CoFSA? And I think it's this: it's the connecting the inner to the outer. It's helping apply consciousness into these sustainable food system projects that we and others have. That's my thinking, at least. You know, we need to really sort of think, what can we bite off and chew? And you know, one thing I quite liked as well, what Jeroen was saying, is sort of how to work across the whole supply chain. And so, you know, one thing that sort of came into my mind is, you know, and again, this is what we can do. We can help convene the retailers, the processors, the traders, the governments, the farmers, the practitioners, and you, the mindfulness experts, together. You know, and maybe we should start thinking about, again, it's not what we want to achieve in 5 years, but, you know, to do half-day workshops, you know, supply chain dialogues, but instead of just talking about sustainability, really bringing in the conscious element. And there might be lots of things. I mean, we're already beginning to talk with some of our teams, like in Paraguay, we have a project on beef, and we're already trying to talk with UNDP about how can we, you know, bring CoFSA into all of the work on sustainable beef production in Paraguay. And I think maybe we need to be thinking just about more and more practical applications of how we can apply and integrate CoFSA into these other existing sustainable food system projects, because I think it's our added value, and particularly as UNDP, we can bring the stakeholders together and we can help experiment applying it in the 1.2 billion. Again, out of that 1.2 billion, I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of colleagues who say, no, thank you. We don't want that or need that. But, you know, gradually, like with the WWF India project or Paraguay, and I think some of our other partners will begin to find those opportunities where we can start piloting all of this work. But Gabor, over to you. And then I think we will jump back into our breakouts.
Yeah, I was just listening to Simon's summary, and I fully agreed with his point, and realized that when we coined this term conscious food systems alliance, there was an underlying meaning behind conscious food systems, a longer sentence actually: consciousness as a solution for systemic change in food systems. So that's our hypothesis here, if I understand the project well. And if that's the underlying hypothesis, then we need to break it down into several sub-questions, like, what do we mean by consciousness? What type of consciousness? What type of mindfulness, awareness, where, in what field of life, etc. Then how to practice it in relation to the food system, the whole chain. How to practice it as a farmer, how to practice it as a consumer, how to practice it as a minister or as a policymaker, etc., etc. Then who shall practice it? And that was my point in the breakout group, that we should aspire for a whole system approach. If we want to reach something really meaningful and groundbreaking in the next 5 years, which is probably the goal here, I agree with someone who mentioned that we should be ambitious. Then we do need to understand the full spectrum of stakeholders and come up with some advices and guidance for all particular stakeholders in that sense. And then the real question for me would be how to apply it in real terms. So what are the actual new ways of being, the new ways of acting in the whole chain of the food system? And then Sarah did this term in our breakout group, actually, and here as well, that it's important in order to get there to demystify and make practical the role of consciousness in transforming food systems. So I just wanted to sort out my own understanding around what we are dealing here with.
Great, no, super helpful, Gabor, and you know, what you're saying and what everyone's saying in the comments in the chat. I think we're getting there. We're beginning to really break this down, which is important. I think we should go back into breakout groups, and what I'd suggest is what I'm hearing is a lot of obviously super pertinent, relevant, value-added thinking around what are we aiming, or you know, what sort of the boundaries of what we're trying to do, and a discussion, you know, solution, enabler, etc. So maybe what we can do though is really try to think, all right, with all of that, what we're getting at, what could be a good place to be in 5 years? Because you know, we're not going to raise the awareness of the entire world around consciousness in 5 years. I wish we could. I'll still be trying to raise the awareness of some of my colleagues in 5 years, or even myself. So let's just maybe think about that, you know, maybe get a bit more practical. I mean, we can certainly, you know, digest a bit more in our groups what we've heard if things are really stimulating, but maybe come up with, maybe we come back to plenary, each group can come up with one or two, report back one or two practical things that maybe we could try to have achieved in 5 years. Okay, so Alice, if you can, put us back in the groups and we'll reconvene in 15 minutes.
Sure, just doing that.
All right, great. Well, I think certainly from our group, that was really helpful to have that extra time. We started getting some ideas, or getting a bit further in our thinking, which is super helpful. What I would suggest, we have around 20 minutes left, is, so Alice, how many groups were there? Were there 4 in the end?
Yes, exactly, 4.
Yeah, so maybe let's just do that. Have a volunteer from each group just say what sort of, you know, if there's 1 or 2 emergent ideas that did come out, we can just share them. And then I might call on a couple of people that have been a bit quiet, like Jane. Jane is one of our core partners here. So after we've heard from the breakouts, Jane, I'm going to have you come in with your thoughts, and that will then ignite the remaining conversation time. Okay, so breakout, why don't I have breakout group 2? Anyone from breakout group 2 wants to just say a couple words?
That was our group, I think. Who wants to say something? Don't all rush at once.
I can say something. I can say something, Thais.
Yeah.
Okay. I think 2 main perspectives, I would say 3, merged in our group. One was that we are right now focusing. I really like the idea of IDGs. IDGs, no, as we are now in the Sustainable Development Goals, we will have like the inner sustainable goals, and that the focus right now is on what needs to happen in the world, and how we are going to merge in this process also these aspects of mindfulness and inner development in time. I myself gave the example of how important I think it's to have real examples of places that are, even if it's on a small scale, that are already doing that in an integral way, because I think that people are very touched by something that they feel. If we are talking about a dimension that we don't know, it's still very is very unfamiliar to us because it's not part of our culture. It's very important that we also feel it instead of just having a concept, but just having a feeling and that I think there is a network of regeneration centers, especially in Latin America, in which this is very present. You know, like is the idea of improving, of making things better all the time, and this means that you have to address spiritual and psychological dimensions that in normal places, and we are just into action. You don't look so much into them. So I suggest that this should be highlight the experiences, the lessons learned, like translate that into a form that can be multiplied, you know. And then I think there was a question about faith and how faith groups since ever have been working with food and have this inner dimension as part of it, even if it's framed into the religions. No, I think we had these three perspectives. No, so if maybe somebody else from the group can add to what I said.
Great, thanks, Thijs. Maybe let's hear from group 3. Anyone from group 3 want to say a few words?
Iman, you want to go ahead? You're unmuted. I see. Sima?
Maybe I could say something.
Yeah, please. Great, Kopanko.
Yes, coming from this place where the context of conscious mindset, consciousness is viewed differently. I grew up, I was initiated in a spiritual forest, and the forest was the mind of the community because food came from the medicine, meditation, you know, connecting with the world was to go into that world. And so depending on where we come from, we can look at this differently. So in our group, I was listening, yes, and I think there is so much about the inner consciousness and how it is connected could be a little different. So I was wondering how working together collectively in a system change, it's about these relationships, how they could be fluid from the different perspectives. And in my perspective, I see a lot about leveraging the power of, the spiritual force for us is the youth. And they have an apathy about the way we look at, and speaking from the point of view of African youth who are either migrating or completely out of their minds because of wars and all the like, and who are not connected to this way of looking into the future at all. So we experimented with eco-villages because there are lots of concepts that come together, including community, university partnerships, research in development education. And yeah, I think the way we would achieve this, it's if we find a way of weaving and navigating all the different perspectives in such a way that if our target is to achieve a regenerative for the way the would say the future is, there are different things. So if we are going to achieve equity, is it something crafting the story and positioning indigenous, combining this? It's really an infrastructure that is not yet in Africa.
Great, thank you, Konkanko. And I think it's really building on what we've been hearing a lot about, the need to bring in all the different stakeholders to get their diverse views. And we were talking about that as well, creating sort of a space where that can happen. So maybe actually turn over to group 4, where we were talking about this, if someone would like to say a few words.
I think Christina would be the nice
Christine
choice, because you were so.
Sorry, I just missed the last 2 minutes, but Gaba, you helped me, right? So
Yeah,
I guess we just discussed the importance of creating such spaces of emergence, I guess, just following up on what was just said, to allow the possibility to, that the solutions emerge from what also Rachel before said, based on the needs and the local problems, but in a way that inner dimensions are considered, which is different from how things are approached currently, and to be careful of not falling into the trap of becoming instrumental, but rather creating space for emergence, for linking inner and outer change, in a way that we manage to get to the root causes of things, which many already mentioned. And I often say I think it's always easy to remember that it's often about isms like consumerism and racism, sexism. And so to come to a new way of designing projects and creating space for emergence, but in a way that the inner and the outer can come together, but be contextualized.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Christine. Great, so maybe just group 1. Someone from group 1 just want to wrap us up in the groups.
Should I do that, Andrew? Okay.
All right, so you can do that, and then you can give some broader, that can then feed into maybe your if you want, just your broader thoughts on how this is all going today.
Okay, yeah. So group 1, we had Jamie and Jerome and Katie, who we seem to have lost at some point. Yeah, it was a really stimulating discussion, and we were building on each other. And please feel free to jump in, Jerome and Jamie, if I'm missing anything. We were thinking about the unique contribution that UNDP could have and CoFSA could have in a field where others are already doing this kind of work at different levels. And we would have loved, I would have loved to continue the conversation, but where we kind of ended at, it felt like was, really leveraging all the different levels that UNDP works in. So we talked about this kind of tension or dance between the hyper-local level and the need to be humble and really come from a place of emergence, being in service of what's actually helpful and needed and wanted in the local level, but then tapping into the muscularity of the UNDP and working at the national, global levels, and maybe bringing in some, but where then the courage and that boldness is important when talking to large companies like Unilever. We didn't talk about government so much, but where you can speak kind of authentically at all these different levels, but adapt the narrative and language to meet people where they're at. So it's not necessarily we work at this level, but not that level. There's this approach, but not that approach. But meeting people where they're at and really listening to what's being called for, given who's in the room. We had kind of, specific ideas around, maybe identifying 4 consciousness areas that might be appropriate. I think we talked about it more at the local level, and that might be different depending on the context. And then Jamie mentioned a presentation from the grassroots workshop where one of the presenters spoke to a training of trainers model, which might be a way to, stay grounded in the local context, and using of course, a very co-creative approach. But then that's also a way to maybe do more pilots in different countries. And that's part of the strengths that the UNDP has, is that you're present in all the different, in lots of countries. Yeah, so public-private partnerships, as I mentioned. Is there anything else, Jamie, Jerome, that you want to add?
I like Jeroen's boldness with saying, right, we want to cover 80% of the food system by market cap, and having this big vision that players in the private sector are more likely to be motivated by, particularly if you've already got a few of the low-hanging fruit involved. So maybe 80% of the food system by market cap, and I think you said like a million people on the ground. And we talked about, like Jane said, the tension or the dance there between humility and emergence, and needing to be bold and have a big story. Like funders are more likely to back something sometimes when you ask for $1 million to do a big thing rather than 50,000 or something. Jeroen, do you want to jump in there?
Well, it's hard to be more bold than what you just said. So what do you left for me, crumbs? No, but I think it's not so crazy, yeah? So 1 million, what does that mean, You need to train maybe 1,000 trainers, and that's not so difficult these days online. If every 1,000 does, have do 50 programs or whatever it is, and then there are lots of people who really want to volunteer, very passionate, and including we work with the EU and big companies. There are lots of people who are a little bit disillusioned with the system, but are really dying to do something meaningful, in addition to their work. So I think if we, and this is the dance with this Jane describes so well, so beautiful, is like being humble and on the other hand being kind of bold. And I think that's an attractive and really compelling story that people want to step into, both investors and also people in organizations and alongside the chain. And it's not so far off, people, look at all the people are here. I know you have a huge ecosystem, humbled. Yeah, beautiful. So there, anyway, I'll leave it to Jane again.
Yeah, but maybe we'll wrap that up. But that was great. Thank you, everyone. And now I think we're really getting somewhere. As always, there's lots to do. And funny enough, Jan, I was actually going to call on you. So I'm glad you put your hand up, because I'm going to ask Thomas to do the closing remarks and wrap us up. But I did want to give the floor to you, Jan, because you're a bit of a newcomer, and yet you've been working so much on all of these inner development goals. I thought it'd be great to just hear from you how this workshop is resonating, and if it's stimulating any ideas for you on how we connect everything together. So yeah, Jan, over to you for a few minutes.
Yes, thank you everybody for having me. I feel energized and enriched by the dialogues here. And from the Eckhardt Foundation part, I've been there for 10 years soon, and we've been engaging different thought leaders and also organizations and companies. And I think what Jerome is saying, it's really possible. We managed to get some of the top 10, like Amy Edmondson, Octa Sharma, Peter Senge, Bob Keegan, to all step in and work and lecture pro bono. We also said, like, to all the companies and organizations that has come or used tools, we're not paying for any tools. If you want to use any tools, you have to give them away for free. And many have said yes. I think there's a lot of the stuff that we're going to put together in the toolbox that will be able to be used pro bono for non-government organizations and schools. That's more and more our principles. We say you charge the businesses, but don't touch the schools or education or non-government organizations. And I think there is a model there where we could really reach a lot of people with scientifically based interventions. And we have Christine Wamsler and some other brilliant scientists and researchers that could follow and do and write scientific papers as is happening already through the Accredit Foundation that we could include in this project as well. So I'm really grateful and hopeful for have spent the afternoon on a very hot Swedish day. You know, they say the Swedish summer is the best day of the year. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jan. And we will wrap up on time, so you can get out and enjoy the rest of the summer's day. And so with that, Thomas, I think it'd be good to get your sense of everything you've been hearing. Did we answer your questions?
No. I mean, well, I think we're on our way, but I think it's good to realize, you know, that there is a pathway toward that, and it may not be the wisest thing to try to answer straightforward these kind of questions. I feel like we have been a lot on yin yangs and trying to find a balance. We see, like, I think the notions of there are maybe at least two different worlds, like from the more local and from the more global level, and how can we deal with that? How can we deal with you know, being the need for a bold vision, but also be humble when and context specific when we reach the ground. So that already came out in our discussion and in April. The question was that, you know, how do we try to do everything together with different types of interventions, and we're more like a platform, a movement, or should we be more specific? So I think these are all good. We are being conscious a lot of things, also about demystifying. Also, I like that consciousness. Also, maybe also in some cases traditional knowledge. So a lot of things to be able, maybe consciousness, but, you know, seeing things just a bit more clearly, facing things, you know, facing realities on the ground. So yeah, there's a lot of material there. So it's a series of discussion. We'll have a follow-up. That would be a very great session, I believe, on Wednesday. We'll talk about our theory of change, evidence basis. I think that would be more on different initiatives, also research of our partners on that. So I think that would fuel nicely the discussion. We'll come back probably to this thing around, you know, these two different worlds. I think it will connect also to that conversation. So and yeah, this is a journey. So then we'll have and make the transition to the last workshop on a community of practitioners. I think that's what we already are. We have these dialogues, and that can be really helpful to, you know, look deeper into things, connect with each other. So we are on that journey. I really appreciated myself being here and with all of you. So thanks, and looking forward to seeing you again next Wednesday.
Great, thank you, Thomas. So I think what we'll do, just to close, it's something we do in some of our team calls, is everyone can just say one word capturing how they're feeling. So a one-word emotion to wrap up from everyone. So Alice, why don't you start us off and then hand off to someone else?
Energized. And I'll pass to Gabor.
Enabled.
It's like, was that Gabor or Gopal? I couldn't hear it properly.
It was Gabor.
No problem. I will ask you, Gopal. So I just said enabled. Gopal.
Excited, and I'll pass it to Rachel.
Yeah, curious and excited. And I'll pass it to Simon.
Regenerating. And I'll pass it to Christine.
Finding peace. I pass to Lorraine.
I'm curious, and I'll pass it to Alana.
I also had excited, be re-energized and hopeful. And I'll pass it to Jamie.
I'm feeling creative, and I'll pass it to Teresa.
I'm feeling challenged, and I pass it to Konkaku.
I'm inspired, and I pass it to Jane.
I'm also curious, and I'll pass it to Seema.
I'm feeling connected to like-minded people. I'll pass it to Andrew. Have you gotten?
No, thank you. Energized and grateful. Pass to Thais. Oh, you're on mute.
Grateful and interested.
I think we have
pass-
Jerome and Jan left.
Okay, so Jerome.
Feeling a sense of possibility emerging. Yeah. Jan.
So I end with meaning and presence.
Great. Awesome. Well, listen, guys, it was phenomenal. I love these 2 hours as ever with all of you, and I look forward to the next workshop. So thank you all. We will do our best to capture all the brilliance and ideas that came out in a bold and humble yet muscular manner. So we'll see what emerges. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.
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 Thank you.